He never expected to find her standing at the door, tears streaming down her face, bags packed at her feet. She was the most powerful woman in the city, a CEO worth hundreds of millions, and she was crying in front of a single dad who could barely make rent. What she said next changed both of their lives forever. Nathan Cole hadn't slept past 5:47 a.m. in 4 years. Not since Emma was born. Not since Sarah left. Not since the world quietly decided that he would figure everything out on his own. He wasn't bitter about it. Not anymore. He had learned, the hard way, that bitterness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when a 4-year-old needed breakfast. Not when daycare bills didn't care about your feelings. That Tuesday morning started like every other. He pulled on his gray Henley, the one with the small tear near the collar that he kept meaning to throw away. He padded downstairs in his wool socks, stepped over Emma's stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hop, and started the coffee machine with the kind of automatic precision that only comes from doing something exactly 1,461 times in a row. Outside, the Colorado mountains were doing what they always did in November, turning the whole world white and silent and impossibly beautiful. Nathan barely noticed anymore. Beauty was hard to appreciate when you were calculating whether you could afford both the electric bill and Emma's new winter boots this month. He was standing at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the first snow of the season dust across the pine trees, when he heard it. A sound. Soft. Almost nothing. He thought it was the wind at first. Then he heard it again. A small, choked sob from somewhere outside his front door. Nathan set down his coffee cup slowly. Someone was crying on his porch. At 5:52 in the morning. He opened the door, and everything he thought he knew about his life rearranged itself in an instant. She was sitting on his porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than his truck. Her blonde hair was down, tangled slightly from the wind. She had one leather carry-on bag beside her, and her phone face down on the step like she'd thrown it there on purpose. He recognized her immediately. Everyone in Clearwater Ridge did. Victoria Hale, 34 years old, CEO of Hale Technologies, a company worth $400 million that had its headquarters right at the edge of their small mountain town. She bought the old Whitmore property 2 years ago, the massive logging glass estate about a half-mile up the road from Nathan's far more modest cabin. He'd seen her exactly twice, once at the hardware store buying paint samples, once driving a black Range Rover past his mailbox at 80 miles an hour. She was not the kind of woman who sat on strangers' porches and cried before sunrise. And yet, Nathan, "Hey, are you okay?" She looked up. Her eyes were red. Her mascara, the kind that was supposed to be waterproof, had lost the argument. She stared at him for a second like she'd forgotten he existed, then looked down at his porch steps like she was trying to figure out how she'd ended up there. "Victoria, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I just needed somewhere to sit for a minute. I'll go." "Nathan, it's 23 degrees out here." "Victoria, I know." "Nathan, you want to come in?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was trying to decide if he was dangerous. He must have passed the test, because she picked up her bag, stood slowly, and walked through his front door. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he stepped aside to let her in, his entire life changed direction. He poured her a coffee without asking how she took it. She held the mug in both hands and stared at the fireplace like she was watching something burn that wasn't there. Nathan sat across from her at the kitchen table and waited. He was good at waiting. Single parenting had taught him that most things couldn't be rushed. Tantrums, homework struggles, grief. You just had to sit with people until they were ready. After about 3 minutes of silence, she spoke. "Victoria, my board voted me out last night. The company I built from a $12,000 loan in my parents' garage. They voted me out of my own company." Nathan said nothing. He just nodded. "Victoria, I found out at 11 p.m. I tried to call my sister. She didn't pick up. I tried my best friend. She's in London, didn't answer. I called the man I've been seeing for 8 months, and he said, and I quote, 'That's rough, babe. Can we talk tomorrow? I have an early tea time.'" Nathan winced. He couldn't help it. Victoria. So I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I ended up here. She looked around his kitchen. The crayon drawing Emma had taped to the refrigerator, the small rubber boots by the back door, the stack of picture books on the counter. I didn't realize anyone actually lived here. I thought it was a vacation rental. Nathan. Nope. Just me and my daughter. Victoria. How old? Nathan. 4. She'll be up soon, which means if you want peace and quiet, you've got about 40 minutes. Something crossed Victoria Hale's face then. Something that wasn't sadness. Something that looked almost like relief. She didn't leave. She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug and said, "Tell me about her." Emma came downstairs at exactly 6:31 a.m., dragging Mr. Hop by one ear, wearing her dinosaur pajamas and her father's oversized wool socks that came up to her knees. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looked at Victoria, tilted her head. "Emma, Daddy, there's a lady." Nathan. "Yeah, Bug? Her name is Victoria. She's a neighbor." Emma studied Victoria with the fearless, unfiltered scrutiny that only 4-year-olds can get away with. "Emma, your eyes are puffy." "Victoria, I know. I was crying." "Emma, did you fall down?" "Victoria, sort of." Emma thought about this for a moment, then walked to the couch, retrieved a small stuffed bear named Captain Ears, and held it out to Victoria with both hands. "Emma, he helps. He's very soft." Nathan watched Victoria Hale, CEO, Forbes 40 under 40, woman who had negotiated $200 million acquisition deals, accept a stuffed bear from a 4-year-old in dinosaur pajamas. And he watched something in her face completely fall apart and then, slowly, quietly, put itself back together. She stayed for breakfast. Then she stayed for lunch. And when Nathan made Emma's favorite, grilled cheese and tomato soup, she didn't leave for that either. By the time darkness came down over the mountains, the snow was falling in earnest, and Victoria's Range Rover was buried up to its bumpers in the driveway. She called a tow company, busy. She called 3 hotels in town, all full because of a ski convention. She called her housekeeper to open her estate. No answer. "Nathan, you can have the guest room. It's not much, but it's warm." She'd hesitated. The old Victoria, the one from 3 days ago, would have found another solution. Would have called her assistant, called a car service, called anyone rather than owe anything to anyone. But that Victoria had been voted out last night. This one, standing in a stranger's kitchen with flour on her cashmere coat from helping Emma make pancakes, just said yes. He gave her an old flannel shirt to sleep in. Dark red and black plaid, worn soft from 100 washes. It was the most comfortable thing she'd ever worn. She didn't know how to explain that without sounding insane, so she didn't try. She slept like she hadn't slept in years. In the morning, she came downstairs in the flannel shirt and Nathan's wool socks she'd borrowed the night before, hair loose around her shoulders, no makeup, coffee already poured because she'd been awake since 5 and had learned where he kept the mugs. Nathan came down 20 minutes later, saw her standing at his kitchen window looking at the snow, wearing his shirt, and felt something shift in his chest that he immediately told himself to ignore. "Nathan, that's my shirt." She turned around, and she smiled. Not the polished, camera-ready smile from her company's press releases. A real one, unguarded, slightly embarrassed and possibly warm. "Victoria, I didn't want to leave." 4 words. Simple. Quiet. Neither of them could pretend it meant nothing. Nathan Cole was not a man who talked about himself. He'd learned, through Sarah, through the divorce, through the slow erosion of a marriage that probably hadn't been right from the beginning, that opening up was a form of vulnerability that cost too much and paid out too little. But there was something about Victoria Hale that made him want to be honest. Maybe it was because she'd arrived broken. Maybe it was because she'd sat at his kitchen table with red eyes and no performance and no armor. Maybe it was because Emma had given her Captain Ears and she'd cried, actually cried, over a stuffed animal from a 4-year-old. Whatever it was, on the second morning, over coffee, with Emma still asleep upstairs, he told her things he hadn't said out loud in years. He told her about Sarah, how they'd met in college, how young they'd been, how they tried to want the same things and just couldn't in the end. How she'd left when Emma was 8 months old, not because she was cruel, but because she was honest in a way that gutted him. "I don't want this life, Nathan. I'm sorry. I don't know how to want it." She'd said it standing in their kitchen, and he'd stood there holding their infant daughter, and he had nodded, because what else do you do? He told Victoria about the first year, about learning to do everything alone, about calling his mother in Denver at 2 a.m. because Emma had a fever of 104 and he was terrified, about the moment he stopped being scared and started being steady, because Emma needed steady and he was all she had. Victoria listened to every word. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't offer pity. She just listened, like it was the most important thing she'd ever done. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that stopped him cold. "Victoria, you know what the loneliest thing in the world is? Having everything everyone thinks you want and still eating dinner alone every night." The snow didn't stop. Roads in Clearwater Ridge were closed until Thursday, the county website said. Victoria's assistant called 17 times. She answered none of them. Her lawyer called twice. She answered the second one, spoke for 4 minutes in a voice Nathan had never heard from her before, cool, precise, tactical, and then hung up and came back to the kitchen and helped Emma build a Lego castle on the living room floor like nothing had happened. Nathan watched her from the doorway and felt completely helpless in a way that had nothing to do with helplessness. He made dinner, pasta with a slow-cooked meat sauce, crusty bread, the bottle of red wine he'd been saving for no occasion in particular. Emma ate her pasta and announced it was the best thing in the universe, and then fell asleep on the couch between the two of them, Mr. Hop under one arm and Captain Ears under the other. They didn't move her. They sat there in the firelight with a sleeping 4-year-old between them and drank their wine and talked quietly for 3 hours. About everything. About nothing. About the company and the board and the betrayal, and why she'd trusted the people she trusted. About why Nathan had stayed in Clearwater Ridge when he could have gone anywhere. About what Emma had said at daycare last week that had made him laugh so hard he'd had to pull the car over. About the kind of people they'd been before life had rearranged them, and whether they missed those people. Neither of them said what was obvious by midnight, that they didn't want the night to end. That the space between them on the couch, with Emma small and warm between them, felt like the most honest place either of them had been in years. Thursday came. Roads cleared. Victoria's assistant sent a car. She stood at Nathan's front door at 8 a.m. with her leather bag and her repaired mascara and her cashmere coat, and she looked nothing like the woman who'd been sitting on his porch steps 2 mornings ago. She looked like Victoria Hale, CEO, Forbes 40 under 40, woman with a $400 million company to reclaim. Except her eyes were doing something that the Forbes version of her would never have allowed. Emma was holding her hand and looking up at her with the specific expression of a 4-year-old who has decided she loves someone and doesn't understand why they have to go. "Emma, will you come back?" Victoria crouched down to Emma's level, fixed the collar on her dinosaur sweater, tucked her hair behind her ear. "Victoria, yes, baby, I will come back." "Emma, promise." "Victoria, I promise." She stood up, looked at Nathan. He was leaning against the doorframe with his coffee and his torn gray Henley and his 3-day stubble, and he looked steady, calm, like a man who knew how to wait. "Nathan, you don't have to promise her if you don't mean it." "Victoria, I know." A beat. The black car at the end of the driveway. The snow still white on the pine trees. "Victoria, I meant it." She walked to the car. He watched her go, and he didn't know, not yet, what she was about to do next. What happened over the next 3 weeks was covered by Forbes, Bloomberg, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. Victoria Hale, declared ousted by the Hale Technologies board on a Tuesday night in November, walked back into her boardroom on Monday morning with a legal team of 12, a coalition of minority shareholders she'd been quietly building for 2 years, and a document that proved beyond any doubt that the board's vote had violated 3 separate terms of her founder agreement. The vote was overturned in 48 hours. The 2 board members, who had orchestrated the coup, resigned by Wednesday. The press called it a bloodless coup in reverse. Her stock price went up 11% in a single day. By the end of the month, she had restructured the board, installed 2 new independent directors she actually trusted, and signed the biggest partnership deal in the company's history. Forbes ran a profile. The headline was, "The Comeback." She hated the headline. She told Nathan that on the phone, late on a Wednesday night, sitting on the floor of her penthouse office in Denver with her shoes off. "Victoria, it implies I was gone. I was never gone. I was just regrouping. Nathan, you were sitting on my porch steps crying at 5 a.m. Victoria, that's regrouping." He laughed. She heard it, that laugh she'd been thinking about for 3 weeks, and felt something warm settle in her chest that had nothing to do with winning. They had talked every night, not because they decided to, just because, around 9 p.m. when Emma was asleep and Victoria's meetings were done, they both reached for their phones at the same time. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them stopped. She came back on a Saturday, 3 weeks and 4 days after she'd left. No car. She drove herself, in her personal car. Not the black Range Rover, but a beat-up dark green Jeep she'd had since grad school that she kept because she liked it and didn't care what it said about her. She brought 2 bags of groceries and a small stuffed elephant she'd found in a toy store in Denver because Emma had mentioned once, in passing, that Mr. Hop needed a friend. Emma opened the door before she even knocked. "Emma, you came back." Victoria laughed, surprised, bright, completely unguarded. Emma launched herself at her with the full-bodied trust of a child who has never been let down by someone she decided to love, and Victoria caught her and held on like she'd been doing it her whole life. Nathan appeared in the doorway behind Emma. Same gray Henley, same old socks, coffee in hand, looking at her like he'd known she'd come, like he'd been calmly, quietly certain about it the whole time. "Nathan, I was wondering when you'd show up." "Victoria, I brought groceries. I'm making dinner." "Nathan, you cook." "Victoria," badly, but confidently. He stepped aside and let her in. She set her keys on the small table by the door. Neither of them said anything about how right that felt. They didn't need to. Dinner was as promised, confident and bad. The pasta was overcooked. The sauce was undersalted. The bread burned on one side. Emma ate 3 bowls. Afterwards, Emma fell asleep on the couch with the new stuffed elephant, named, immediately and permanently, Mrs. Trumpet, tucked under her chin. Nathan carried her upstairs. Victoria washed the dishes without being asked. When he came back downstairs, they sat at the kitchen table with their wine and the fire and the snow beginning again outside, and they were quiet for a long time in the way of people who have run out of need to fill silence. Then Victoria said something he hadn't expected. "Victoria, I've been thinking about what I want. Not the company. The company is sordid. I mean what I actually want. When I'm honest." Nathan waited. "Victoria, I want to come back here. Not because I have to. Not because the roads are closed. Just because I want to. Because sitting at this table drinking bad wine with you is the only place in the last 3 years I've felt like myself." The fire cracked. Outside, the snow came down soft and steady over the pine trees. "Nathan, the wine is actually pretty good." "Victoria, I'm being serious." "Nathan, I know. So am I." He paused. "The wine is a 2019 Malbec. It's excellent. But yeah." He looked at her. "Come back." It wasn't romantic in the way movies make things romantic. No swelling music, no dramatic speech, no rain. Just 2 people at a kitchen table, finally telling the truth. Epilogue, 6 months later. Victoria Hale still ran her company, still took calls at odd hours, still showed up in Forbes and Bloomberg, and on panels at tech conferences talking about founder rights and board governance. She also showed up at Nathan's kitchen table on Friday nights, with groceries and a bottle of something better than the Malbec, wearing his flannel shirt before he'd even offered it. Emma started calling her Tory, which Victoria initially said was undignified for a CEO, and then stopped arguing because Emma said it with such casual ownership that arguing felt like missing the point. Nathan still got up at 5:47 a.m., still made the coffee, still stepped over Mr. Hop at the bottom of the stairs. But the cabin didn't feel like a place where someone had quietly decided to figure everything out alone anymore. It felt like somewhere people came back to. It felt like home,